Good morning, Sabal here. I always mispronounce it, you know that. Thank you for coming, all of you, especially the students. What we are trying today is to have a discussion. Many things that we are presenting you may find difficult to comprehend, or it seems that it may not necessarily directly link to the immediate issues that you face as students, as people living under occupation, with all the multitude of problems and struggles of survival that you have. But this is where it becomes very important, the exchange of ideas and experiences. And for us, as academics, as organizers, I am and have been not an academic, a professional, full-time political activist, union organizer, and also in that context, a union organizer and educator. When we were young, your age, when I was your age, we had a very critical crisis in world politics, and that was the Vietnam War. Most people in the U.S. had no idea what Vietnam was. People were being sent to Vietnam not having left their neighborhoods. And it became very important to educate, to enlighten an understanding of what Vietnam was, who Vietnamese were, what was their struggle, and why we needed to stop the war. And where we did it was at the universities and at the communities. We had teachings, as this is a teaching. And through that process, we began to understand the dynamics and realities of Vietnam, the realities as explained by Martin Luther King, who spoke out against the war in Vietnam, connected the war in Vietnam with the social political reality in the U.S. and especially in the context of the struggle that he was leading, the black civil rights power struggle. So that we had to do this in order to begin to open up the political struggle that eventually became millions of people against the war. And today we face the critical question of Palestine. And as you know, the U.S. is the principal basis for the power of the Israeli state. It's our money, the billions that finance the state of Israel and makes possible the occupation, the material, political, military occupation. So for us as U.S. political activists, and many of us do not recognize the citizenship question, we are U.S. political activists. We have had to struggle how to overcome the difficulty of raising what is said to be the complex question of Palestine. It is so difficult to discuss Palestine. And I remember when I first started as a union activist, and I came from the Vietnam struggle, from the Puerto Rican struggle for independence, and also I was educated by the Palestinian struggle back in the early 60s. And when I tried to introduce the question of Palestine at our national gathering of our unions, the various unions I worked with, I was always confronted with the issue. Oh, you shouldn't be raising this issue. This is too difficult. This is too complex. This is not what our workers want to know about. And how do you explain it? And you're going to be charged with being anti-Semitic. And what about Israel? I was always confronted, not only myself, but other political activists throughout various unions across the country. And the reason we raise this is because this becomes critical in why we're having this discussion. How to break down and educate the mass of people in the U.S. who only get a very distorted conception of the struggle. We are trying to challenge the attempt to legitimate the colonial narrative, to undermine that idea that somehow what exists here is justified by the fact that Israel is perceived to be the democratic state and the Palestinians are perceived to be guided by undemocratic, social, political, and religious realities. That is the distorted reality that we are taught and that our people are informed of on a daily basis, and we are, as educators and political activists, struggling against that. And you see the reaction to that in the universities especially. Because universities is made up of people like you, the young generation, whose intellectual horizons are beginning to be opened, and who are the ones who become the nucleus of challenging the dominant narrative. And that's why, while the universities in the U.S. are supposed to educate and inform, they have shifted into dominant political discourse and also trying to orient people away from the education structure that would open up these discussions. So today, more and more the emphasis is on the sciences, the technology, the business, and less on the humanities, the social service, social sciences, political science, sociology, history. Today, more and more, and why is that important? Because those are the fields that open the intellectual inquiry and open up the debates, and which has been occurring, and I don't have enough time to go over it, which has been occurring in the universities, and has opened up the whole question of Palestine. And that's why there is a very strong backlash, not only against Dr. Abdul Hadi, but to many other university professors and student advocates. The attempt to suppress any and all debate and discussion about Palestine. This is what we're confronting. This is what we're raising. And the reason is because we are in the age. All right, I will quickly. It is based on, this is not an actual development. This is a development that has been occurring over the last few decades. It is reflected here in Palestine. It is reflected in the U.S. It is reflected in Puerto Rico. It is reflected in Haiti. We are in a different phase of finance, political developments, which we in the political science have identified as neoliberalism, which is a different and not totally unique, but a higher level of structural domination and the interrelationship between state intervention and private and corporate intervention in dictating how societies develop and advance. So that the developments are distorted. You have the consumerism development and the emphasis on consumerism as opposed to political, national, and revolutionary activism. So it's meant to consolidate colonial reality, as in the case of Palestine, but also in the case of Puerto Rico, in the case of Haiti. So in concluding, we have to say to ourselves, and get back to the reason why we're here today. What is the role of the academy? What is the role of universities? What is its objective and what purpose does it serve? And this is what we're being challenged with, what we're contesting, why we fight to bring Palestine to the university, to the education, to the community, and into areas where people have roles in the communities and labor. And theory is very important, science is very important, political development, and its connections to the struggle within and outside the university. This is our objective. This is why we introduced this discussion. Unfortunately, we're not able to touch everything. Some of it may be unclear, but hopefully we'll have that discussion. Thank you.